Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's BAInsights, in which I'm very pleased to welcome three more guests to talk about the topic of your BA approach or your business analysis approach. Before we get into that, though, I'd like to just start with some introductions. If I could perhaps start with yourself, Kathy, please.
Hi there, and good day from down under. I'm Kathy from Melbourne, Australia. I started in IT back in the 80s as a developer. Don't hold that against me. But very quickly, it became apparent I was a BA. Just the word BA didn't exist back then. So I was an analyst programmer. But I've been a BA since way back when, and I've worked in all sorts of different projects, small, large, government, non-for-profit, startups, you name it. I've done it sort of kind of. These days, I do a lot of work training BAs, coaching BAs, and I do a lot of this agile business. Anyway, that's enough about me. Look forward to hearing more about everyone else.
That's excellent. Thank you, Kathy. And
Yeah.
Jason, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Jason. I am currently training BAs and coaching BAs at the moment at Kubrick Group. But my career in business analysis started, in IT, started as an IT support. And what I loved about IT support was not necessarily about fixing desktops or servers. It was more about understanding how people use technology to do their work. And that kind of drifted me into the world of projects and business analysis. And I think I've developed my BA approach through making lots of errors, not really understanding what I was doing, progressing into getting some training, working in lots of different sectors, advertising, financial services, insurance, regulation. And having built up all this experience, I'm really glad to be sharing on to the next generation of BAs and product owners and what have you. So that's me for now. I'm from London, so I'm really glad to be here having this conversation.
That's great. Thank you, Jason. And just up the road from me, I'm East London at the moment. So thank you. And Yasser, over to you, please.
Hello, everybody. I'm Yasser Talat from Egypt. Actually, I started my career as a teacher a long time ago. Then I moved to software development. I worked for software development for about 7 years. Then another shift to the career business analysis nearly in 2011. Since then, I'm a business analyst. I worked for diversified businesses, government and e-payments and so on. Currently, I'm working for a payment service provider in Egypt, a fintech company. And actually, I'm also coaching and training BAs. I also lead the IIBA Egypt chapter. I'm the president of IIBA Egypt chapter. I'm happy to join you today and happy to try to share a little bit of my experience with our audience.
Excellent. Thank you, Yasser, and thank you, everybody, for the introductions. So we'll dive straight into it, really. So I'm going to ask Kathy, really, how you typically approach business analysis, or what's your BA approach?
You know, it's something that we talk a little bit about, but not enough about, is when you're given that job, your manager says, I need you to work on this thing, whether it's a project or something strategic, because, you know, BAs do what I call, we survive the project. We could be there before it starts or after it ends. And the first thing I always think is, let's talk about objectives. Let's talk about what success looks like. And then most importantly, try to scope it out, not just scope out the project, but scope I need to speak to. Who are my stakeholders? Where is that gold that I need to mine? Who am I going to work with to really understand the problem, the objective, and then work forward from that point? So I always think about tools such as a context diagram. I know, a little bit old school perhaps, but I find them invaluable to put the idea or the area that I'm working on in the center and say, well, who's interacting there? And that gives me a bit of an idea of not only who I need to speak to, but a bit of a scope, and working together with whoever's given me the work in the first place, whether it's a project manager or the business itself. I find that that's a really great tool to start thinking about, who am I speaking to? What's their areas? what's the interested to them, what's the objective from their point of view. So I always start mainly thinking about my stakeholders.
And I think that those three techniques you mentioned there and approaches there, Kathy, they seem like they're going to have a wider benefit than just for yourself, is having that view on the how the concepts come together, having a view on who the collective stakeholders are, having a view on the project and the scope. Getting that foundation is going to benefit not just you as a BA, but actually everybody involved. So I think that's an excellent place to start. So thank you for that. And Jason, now can I ask you about your approach to BA, please?
Well, my approach, I guess, has evolved. When I started BA, I didn't even know I was a BA. My first project, I remember just speaking to a couple of stakeholders. It was actually a fairly big project. Just speaking to a couple of stakeholders, getting a list of requirements from them. This was kind of in waterfall days, and then handing it to my sponsor and him looking at me saying, "Are you sure you've done this properly?" So I think I've kind of learned from making lots of mistakes, and through a combination of just kind of making mistakes and learning through training and from a more experienced BAs. My approach is kind of, I suppose, evolved into kind of like, let's understand the needs of the business. So someone gives you a project or a problem, don't take it for granted that that is the definition of the problem itself. It's understanding where does the need for that, what different perspectives are there of that problem? Does everyone see the same problem in the same way? So this is where you kind of identify your business need, identify who your stakeholders are, understand where we're trying to get to, and then use all the various tools such as pictures, Pop-it, stakeholder, all of those different things to kind of lead everyone on that journey towards what the outcome is. And I think I used to be very focused on, I had to do everything. That was one of my first conversations was, I have to know what the solution is. And I realized, actually, no, I don't need to know what the solution is. And the closer I am to thinking I know what the solution is, the further I am away from the solution. So really it's about, I think, how do we define what that journey looks like? How do we get everybody on the same page? And how do we lead everyone through a process from where we are to where we want to get to?
And actually, what you highlighted there as well, Jason, was highlight some very relevant and applicable points. Is that some BAs don't just, well, not every BA joins a project right from the start. And actually, sometimes you join in midway through, or there's already been work been done. So actually, your first activity might be to look backwards and see what's already in place. Like if you take Kathy's example, what scope's already been defined, has it been defined, what stakeholders are there, and almost sort of validate it to a point that you can be comfortable that it's a solid foundation on which to build. So I think a really interesting perspective. Thank you. And finally, Yasser, your approach, please.
Well, I always take the flexible way. Not every project is like the other. Okay, so according to the project nature, to the stakeholders' nature, I take my approach. For example, like Kathy, the first things I ask about, who are my stakeholders? Who should I communicate with? I ask another question. Are there any documentations available? Whatever the type of documentation, even if they gave me an access to an old or a legacy system to check, for example. Like you said, John, when I join, for example, in the middle of something, not at the beginning, there should be a different approach. I should start with what have been done, what's already existing, to understand it, then to move from that point. When I join for a change request, for example, there are two types of change requests. I joined, for example, when I join a project or a change request for some solution that I have already built, so I understand it well. So there is no such a problems like searching who are the stakeholders. I already know them. What are the documentations? I already wrote them. Okay. But there's another type when I join for example, and I'm currently in that situation. I joined a firm that is already existing, have their own projects, have products and solutions. So mostly I'm working on change requests for solutions that I didn't know, I didn't work in. So the first things I ask, what are the documentations? I need to have some documentation to understand what's that thing. Then I should understand who are my stakeholders to start communicating with, to start to understand what I mean in the first place. Okay, so the approach is different according to the type of a project, the type of a product, whether it's a product or just a solution, a customized solution.
And that, I mean, is a very interesting perspective there, because you're talking about understanding what's already in place as well, which is absolutely something that that makes me think I do quite often as well, because I'll tend to work on different clients and different projects, and almost like one of the early things I'm doing as part of investigation is trying to appreciate, how does that client tend to manage change? Do they have particular, whether it's techniques or ways to update status as an example, or do they use particular tools, or are there certain milestones they would always expect me to meet in some formal way? So having that knowledge is helpful. But sometimes perhaps as a junior BA as well, having awareness of the techniques that an organization will tend to promote means if you start to use those techniques, by definition, you start to improve your credibility. Because if you can say to your stakeholders, actually, this is not just a technique I'm using, but it's a technique your organization prefers you to use, or it's part of their structured approach to analysis or their structured approach to change, it can help everybody appreciate the legitimacy of your approach. So it doesn't always happen, but certainly looking for that those common standards is typically one of the early things that I do. And I'll definitely won't repeat the things that yourself and Catherine, Jason said before. I think, but other things that I would suggest I tend to do on almost every project as part of my approach is I tend to think about, I always try to document early. So as soon as I start hearing any information about that I'm analysing, it goes on the page, or it goes on the Confluence site, it goes somewhere that everybody can access it. It might have red all over it to say, this is in draft, it's just a fault at the moment, but at least everyone can see where my analysis is going. And that extends to things like plans, process, which I'll end up doing quite a lot, or even requirements as they start to be in draft. And that probably then naturally just flows onto probably the second most important or typical thing I do, which is that transparency, and make sure that everybody knows where they can find the analysis. So it may be me putting it onto a Confluence page as an example, a SharePoint, or just communicating to the stakeholders that there's a certain location where the analysis can be found. So I feel like they're probably some things that some approaches that I typically have, but recognizing, as you all have as well, that no project is the same. So so I guess it feels like from just that question that we probably have elements of like a standardized almost approach, like starting from the point of Kathy mentioned, where we're thinking about what is the scope and the objectives of the project and the stakeholders, which is probably quite a common activity irrespective of project. So those are probably more customizable, dependent tasks that we might end up doing, almost pull them out of our BA toolkit if we need to as well. So I think for that, it'd be interesting to know, perhaps starting with Jason, as to, are there any elements of your approach that you tend to customize or tailor specifically to a particular project or type of client, Jason?
Yeah, I think it very much depends on, going back to Yasser said, understanding what's there already. So if your organization is a mature organization, they've already got maybe some kind of business analysis practice or team where they're using existing standards and the information about systems or products is already in place, you've got a lot more to work with. So if you've got a kind of mature organization and mature project and BA practice, then your starting points and your resources you're going to be able to access are different, and the kind of conversations you're likely to have with your stakeholders are going to be different because they're kind of used to having those types of conversations. If you're in an organization which is, I suppose, less mature, then, you know, I remember being on a client site and explaining that in order to do some background research and understand a particular problem that I hadn't worked with previously, I probably need to organize some kind of workshop. I just mentioned the word workshop, thinking it was a common term, and in her head, a workshop was like a whole day activity. So she immediately pushed back on that. And so it's really interesting to, when you're going into an organization which isn't so mature in terms of project and product delivery, it's really thinking, okay, how can we communicate in a way that they will understand and they will not thinking I'm trying to change everything that happened in the organization. So it won't be necessarily an interview and a workshop, it'll just be a meeting. It'll be, you know, an interview will just be a chat or a conversation. It's still an interview, but it's more adapting the, not making it come across as being so projecty, making it come across as just a conversation where I actually elicit and document the information the same way I would do. But that kind of, the more project stuff, the more kind of overwhelming process stuff, I kind of shield from them and just focus on just making sure I kind of elicit the information from them as is necessary. So my approach changes depending on the context, depending on the individual stakeholders, because ultimately what I'm trying to do is understand what their needs are, and making sure we're speaking in the same language is really important.
Yeah. And I mean, you made several good points there. But one I'll pick out particularly is around that terminology, because I mean, certainly there's some examples. I mean, you mentioned one where people are not aware of what a workshop is, or how to, you know, what your definition of it is. But I'm sure even people that have got very specific domain expertise, you know, I historically have loan expertise from a number of years ago. If I go from client to client, their understanding of particular aspects of like loan terminology are not the same as well. So I think it's a really good point to make BAs aware that not just their approach is going to adapt, but often their terminology as well. And yes, sir, I wonder if I could ask you a similar question to Jason around specific points in your BA approach that you might tailor or customize as appropriate.
Okay, I'll start with the point that Jason confirmed about the context. It all depends on the context, actually. For the places I were working on for some longer time, we have a stable approach, we have a stable process. So the tailoring is to the minimum. But for example, when I go for a new team, and I face that when I consulted some firms or some companies that I didn't work with before, I start to understand first. I ask first what's in place as usual. What process do you go for? What documentation types you prefer? What techniques you work with? Sometimes, for example, I turn to, I'll give a very simple example using user stories versus use cases. For example, I got into a project and they were stuck. There were a communication problem between the analysis team and the development team. They didn't understand each other. When I talked to a representative from the software development team, I got the point that the best way to write to them, or the best technique to use with them to understand and to go for the work, is the use cases versus user stories. The business analysis team, the existing business analysis team, used to write user stories, but this technique was not good enough, was not suitable for the software development team. I had to change. I convinced the business analysis team to try to write in a use case scenario because I found that it's more suitable for the software development team. And guess what? They have a very great success in understanding each other, and they work well. So again, it depends on the context, of course. Not every time we need to tailor. Okay, that's it.
That's right. And I mean, it's really valid point at the end there that we don't always have to tailor situations. I mean, if we could, you know, sometimes we move from project to project within the same organization. Sometimes actually maybe the BA approach is the only thing that's like quite standard or structured, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. And Kathy, I wonder, finish with yourself on that question.
So many great points already raised by Jason and Yasser, and I agree with everything that's been said. But the elephant in the room has to be, are we really agile, or are we really agile dressed up as waterfall, or are we really waterfall? And I say that in the nicest possible way, because some people think that they're agile, but it's actually waterfall, or they call it hybrid and it's really waterfall. Or are they truly agile? And I've experienced all three, and all three will work. I don't think that there's a right or a wrong. It depends on the project, the team, and the context. As Yasser said, context is everything. So first thing I need to understand is, what is the expectation? Am I doing all my detailed requirements up front and they're expected to be signed off and locked down? Or are we doing some high-level stuff and then we're going to experiment and try things out in a more agile way? Or is it a bit more hybrid-ish? So I need to understand that side, which I've got to say, as an agile enthusiast, I want to know which way it is, and all is good. But most importantly, Yasser and Jason both mentioned, what are my stakeholders expecting? What are their terminology? What's important to them? Do they need to see process flows in absolute detail with perfect BPMN2? Or they just want some general flowcharting on a whiteboard and people can come together and we collaborate to work it out together? So I start thinking about my stakeholders' expectations of, what do I need to do to enable this project? After all, we are change agents as a BA. So when we think about how's that change going to be managed, what's going to give my stakeholders the right information at the right time? So I'll spend a bit of time thinking about that context of what my stakeholder expectations are, the SDLC being used, and governance, of course. I've worked for government agencies. I've also worked in highly regulated industries. So therefore, some of these decisions are almost out of your hands and you need to do it by the book. So these are important research kind of questions that I'd be digging around and finding out about as early as possible to say, okay, what are the templates expected? Or are there none? Is it up to me to make them up? What makes sense? And most importantly, a point that Jason said, how am I going to make sure that my expectations and my stakeholders are aligned in terms of things like a workshop? Oh no, it's going to be a full day. We're going to be locked in or is it just a chat? So those kinds of important things to look at my stakeholders. What are their expectations? It always starts with me thinking about what their needs and expectations are. And then I go from there, of course, in line with the objectives.
And that makes me think, Kathy, when you talk as well about stakeholder expectations and you talk about Agile as cover examples, it makes me think that I guess maybe one of the things that can often change for me is that I would have a conversation with the technology leads and the architects and those delivering the solutions, and actually try and understand how they work, or what works for them, or what they've not had from BAs in the past, and perhaps that will inform slight variations to our approach. But even just talking about Agile, I mean, Agile isn't just you get it out of the box and you follow every step in exactly the same way, in the same order. It's often dictated by actually the strengths of the team, abilities of the team, you know, who's got what skills and what experience. So coming together as a team in that sense, figuring out how you're collectively going to approach the situation, can have a very material difference in the way that you as a BA experience your particular role. You know, I recall a team I was on a while back, and really collaborative. You know, we'd all agreed that if we had a problem, we need to speak to people. We'd stand up, you know, almost wave the team together. We'd go and sit in a room and we'd thrash it out and figure it out straight away. And that whoever had the question, they could do just the same. You know, and that was a little bit of a change compared to perhaps my prior project, where you might have to more formally go and pull people together. Yeah, but yeah, collectively, some very interesting points there, for sure. I wonder as well, I mean, it makes me think as well, as we're adapting our approaches, when it comes to estimation, you know, how what is your approach to estimation, considering the fact that things can be quite different from project to project? And I wonder, yes, I'll start with you with that question, how you manage estimation of your BA activities.
It's really a very difficult thing. Okay, it's always difficult. Even when we have that experience over the years, still the estimation is something that's not that easy. When I started my career, I actually depended on my leader's estimation. I didn't have enough experience to estimate the work properly. But mainly we did it collaboratively. We discuss about the project, the scope. The scope is everything, actually. The scope is the main point that that can support us to try to estimate to the best for the project. So we should start with understanding the overall scope. Understanding, I'll get back to asking about the stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders? Who should we communicate with? If the stakeholders are in the same place, differs from if they are scattered, for example, geographically, and we need to move from place to place, or we need to gather them electronically, like our meeting now, okay, online conference, for example. So the stakeholders, their places, the geographic scope of the project, whether it's just a simple solution for a small company or, for example, a government project, which involves many ministries, for example, differs from a product that the company is building for itself. For example, estimating a product maybe a forever estimation. We are working forever for a project, okay, for a product, sorry. But actually, scoping helps us at least estimate releases for that product. So I should start with understanding the scope, understanding the stakeholders, how do I communicate with them. Then we put some estimation. Yeah, I prefer the rollout. Sorry, what we call it, the rolling wave estimation. Okay, so I start with, for example, the first release. Okay, we put our estimation for the first release. When we work on that release and it goes well, we can build on that estimation for the second release and so on. We understand or we learn from our mistakes on the first versions or first releases of the project or the product, then build up on that to enhance our estimation for the next releases.
I mean, that's a really key point around, like when you're agile, you don't have to come up with the perfect estimation protocol, because actually you can develop it and evolve it over time. So yeah, really good point to start on that, Yasser. Kathy, can I ask you that question?
Estimation. So I want to focus in on thinking about estimation for the business analysis work. And the old way it used to be done, your project manager will tell you, right? You've got this much time to do your requirements, especially in waterfall. The project manager's got their plan, they've allocated a certain amount of time, and you've got to work backwards from there. Not the ideal situation, but one that I'm sure many of us are familiar with. So I think a few things Yasser said is, if we're working in an agile way, then we might sort of use previous experience, and as we continue to refine how much we really know. So based on what we find as we're delivering perhaps release one, or even as we go sprint by sprint, we get better at estimating through that knowledge acquisition, through feedback and through learning, which is fantastic. But of course, with agile teams, our business analysis activity is almost rolled into the story points, if of course that's what your team's using. There's so many ways that I try to think about it. I've got to tell you, back in the 1990s, when I did a lot of BA work, I was told by my senior BA, who was someone I really respect, her name was Karen. She gave me a lot of great tips. She used to say, well, let's look at your stakeholders. Once you figure out how many stakeholders you have, figure out what level they're at. Are they hands-on at grassroots, or are they up there in the corner office? And depending on how many at what level, then you allocate the kind of time frame for each. I'm telling you, this is a real formula that I was given. So at grassroots, allow a lot more, and at high level, a lot less. And then when you think you've estimated, allow for 2 of that, because you might estimate, I'm going to do an interview with each one of them, or do a one-on-one or a walkthrough, or whatever the case might be. But always expect you're going to be doing follow-ups. Always expect you're going to be refining and asking a few follow-up questions, or perhaps there's a workshop and then afterwards you're going to follow up with some more Q&A, or you do some interviewing and then you might do some modeling and you'll need some input there. That was the old way of estimation. And you know what? It kind of worked. I used to, when I used that example, based on how many stakeholders, what level they were at, and then I allocated a number of hours per what level they were, it came out roughly right. Again, very waterfall. But with Agile, I always think that my estimation, along with the rest of the team, when it comes to estimating stories and how big the stories or epics are, it's about how much BA activity do I think is going to be involved in each individual one, because some stories are simple and I can just leave it to the dev. Other stories need a lot of business rules and a lot of ideas about transition states and things like that, which in case it's going to be a lot more BA work. And sometimes the correlation between how much BA work there is and how much dev and test work there is completely unmarried. I could do a lot of BA work and it's bing bang, or the opposite. It's something that's really complex for them, but for me, I just need to provide a couple of quick answers. So it's very, dare I say, the good old adage, how long's a piece of string? But I do always reflect back on the volume of stakeholders or the volume of requirements. And whenever you think of Agile and story, user stories or epics and features, and I somehow, over time, you get better at judging or gut feeling what that is. But definitely it's not a precise art, and one that definitely needs to be continuously reviewed, adapted and updated as we go.
And at least it shows a structured, methodical approach to estimation where it does need to be done, rather than that sort of like finger in the air. I don't really know, but I'm just going to guess it's 3 months. At least by going down to the level of, as you said, of thinking about some of the tasks, thinking about the different interactions, maybe thinking about different flavors or variations of those tasks and accounting for that at the lowest level, and then bubbling it up. At least it gives an opportunity when you share it for people to look at it and go, well, actually, Kathy, in that example, this part's already been done, so we can skip that. Or, yeah, it's a good thing we hadn't thought about that, and we're going to need to extend that piece. So I think it's certainly some of those lessons I think are very applicable now, should we need to plan to that degree. So, yeah, excellent. And Jason?
Well, I think initially in my career, it was much finger in the air. It's going to be 3 months to do. I find estimation, it's Kathy and said, it's a very complex process. And I think for me, the way that I tend to approach it is I look at the scope of the project and I try and chunk that down into components. So I remember there was a project I was working on for establishing a new kind of procurement function. And there was some governance elements, some operational elements, and some kind of strategic, tactical, managerial elements in the middle. And I essentially looked at the number of components where I would need to do some analysis work on and say, I think it's feasible to do this group of components within the space of a month and deliver some kind of product, whether it's a list of requirements, list of user stories, product backlog, out of that. And that's kind of working in a very much of a waterfall type approach. And I found what that did was probably more for my own focus. And so like, right, this is something that I've got to try and deliver in this amount of time. And what that did, it kind of pushed me away from the temptation to procrastinate or get into too much analysis paralysis to say, right, I need to speak to these people, I need to set up this workshop with these stakeholders. And it just gave me less time to think about setting up those activities. Whereas if I had longer time, I'll just take longer time. I'll probably get into analysis paralysis, and I'll get into asking people lots and lots of different questions, inviting lots of different stakeholders. Well, I think the actual time boxing activity makes me focus on what's essential. And I find that for me, not more than estimating, I tend to time box my work rather than estimate it. Because I know my estimations are always going to be massively incorrect. But if I time box something, I know that there will be some work delivered at the end of it.
Yeah, and that makes me think of the point I would raise as well, in terms of, I guess, that level of precision in your estimations is more important the closer you are to actually working on something. So so I can afford to be a little bit more vague for things that perhaps we're not intended to do for 6 months or a year. Whereas if actually myself and the team are reliant on the activities over the next week to 2 to 3 weeks, then actually that does require perhaps a little bit more rigor with the estimation to make sure that we can, we don't overcommit when we've only got a limited amount of time to do things. I think the only other point I might, and I feel like Kathy might have touched on it anyway when she was talking about the Agile approach, was and the story points, is really just not to have to rely on just your own estimation, your own experience, and to bring the team together. Because unless you're the one doing every piece of work, then it's best to get the team to opine on how collectively it's going to take us as well. Yeah. So I think there's probably a good place, it feels like, to pause at, as you've covered almost everything, I'm sure, on that estimation question. It makes me think as well. I mean, in terms of like continuous improvement, as to how you continually improve and evolve your BA approach. And I wonder, perhaps Kathy, I'll start with you on that question.
It's something that we don't think about enough. And in many teams, we have retrospectives and we think about our teamwork. And that's great. And I think they're essential. Agile or not agile, I think it's way too late at the end of the project to reflect on what could have we done better and write a coulda, woulda, shoulda report. It's too late. And we know from experience, and I'm sure everyone out there probably remembers, we do a post-implementation and then that gets lost or ignored or whatever. So it's got to be done continuously. So I am very proactive, I guess is the right word, about seeking feedback. Not wait till the end, not wait till it's perfect, not wait till it's even done. If I'm starting a process flow, or if I'm starting a spec, or if I'm starting some stuffing, I'm always looking for not just what the content is, but is the process that I'm working, am I working with you the right way? Am I communicating the right way? Is this the right level of detail? Is this the right format? Is this meeting your needs? So we're not just talking about, am I being a good BA in a robot sense? We're really thinking about, is this relationship working? Is meeting every day at 9 a.m. good? So I'm actively asking those questions in a very similar way that I'd be looking for listening requirements. I'm eliciting, am I working the way that you need me to work? Because one thing I feel very strongly about as a BA, we never work for ourselves. We're working for our stakeholders. We're working to make sure the stakeholders understand what the need is and make sure that they're clear and what the solution might be to solve that need. But we're also working very tightly with our delivery team so they understand the stakeholders' need, the value that's being provided, and we're continuously making sure that we're providing the right information to them so they can make the best solutions that provide the maximum value. So a lot of our role is communication. So I'm always looking for tips on, can I communicate with you better? Because that's a huge part of it. And if I don't ask the question, or if I wait till the end and say, did I do a good job? it's a bit late. So proactive feedback, not necessarily so formally, but, you know, in those little catch-ups, or how do you reckon I'm going? Or could I do something better there? You know, just things scattered continuously throughout the day or the process or the work as it's being done is something I look for. I've also worked for bigger organisations where there's been a team of BAs, and so I've head up of a team of BAs. So I'll be looking for a bit more formality of, let's bring us together maybe once a month to talk about those improvements. Can that template be better? Can that process be better? Can we work with, you know, share information and make sure that together we're learning from each other on how to become better BAs collectively as well. So it just depends on that context, but I'm always looking to share my learnings as I learn myself.
That's an excellent start on to that particular point, Kathy, and it shows the need for the BA to have that continual introspection, to be always thinking about how they can improve. And it makes me think, actually, we was having a BAInsights session a few weeks ago on BA competencies, and I think it was Bindu who mentioned, you know, we should almost think about like consideration, or, you know, retrospection as a BA competence. So you deliberately give yourself the time to think about things that you could do better or could improve. So thank you. And Jason.
Yeah, I think the thing about continuous improvement, I think about reflection, and reflection in a way that, you know, you may have a conversation with a stakeholder that didn't go the way that you wanted it to, or you may organize a workshop and it didn't go the way that you wanted to, and you kind of think, okay, why do I feel like that? And going back to Kathy's point, who can I ask for feedback to validate whether that was actually their experience as well, or from their side, did it go quite well and I'm just kind of maybe being a little bit too self-critical? But I think it's almost, I think it's a really essential component for BA skill set to have that kind of self-awareness and self-consciousness of their own performance. But back to what Kathy was saying, seek feedback. No, so seek feedback from colleagues, seek feedback from people you've had interviews with, seek feedback from people, workshops, seek feedback from your managers. But I think the whole thing about having those kind of, not big formal check-ins, but those kind of having those regular touch points with stakeholders. And I think for some BAs, and I think for myself in particular, coming from a kind of a environment where I was supposed to provide solutions, making that transition to seeking regular feedback was actually quite difficult early on in my career, until I got some mentoring, until I kind of almost matured as an individual to start saying actually seeking feedback isn't a bad thing. Is actually a really good way of building trust with your stakeholders. It kind of speaks to the whole area of kind of vulnerability in some sense. So it actually becomes a means of building a rapport with your stakeholders if you seek feedback from them, and if you actually implement your feedback in your ongoing work.
And it shows you care as well, Jason, doesn't it? It shows you care about stakeholders, shows you that you care about delivery, shows you care about your development as well. So in that sense, I mean, there's nothing to object to, really, I think, in that sense. Yeah, perfect point. And Yasser, to you on it.
Really, I don't have anything different than what Jason and Kathy has said already. Feedback is the key, of course. Whether we are working in an agile environment or waterfall or a mix or whatever, I always consider retrospectives is something that's very important. Whether we are working with Agile or without, or working in a mix between Agile and waterfall, or working purely waterfall, retrospectives are very important. And as Kathy said, even if we are working in a waterfall environment, we shouldn't wait until the end of the project. At the end, most people would say, well, the project were a success, so it's great, no problem. Okay, but I didn't know what are my pitfalls as a BA, what were my problems, what were my mistakes. So continuous feedback is really a key in that. whether in the formal way or informal way, it doesn't matter. The feedback I should use to enhance my techniques, to change my techniques, to enhance my process itself. For example, we may be working in an agile environment, but my work as a BA is purely waterfall in the BA perspective. I prepare everything from the start, and I do all my business analysis work at the beginning, and then scatter it to the releases or whatever what we call when we use the agile framework, the suitable agile framework. So feedback is the key to enhance our process in general.
And I think related to that, I mean, I think the thing I would add is really like observation. I think is a good way to improve as a BA as well. So a lot of I think a lot of areas I've improved over the years, being as a direct result of observing others, and not just observing other BAs. You can observe people in different ways. I mean, I recall a few very specific examples of people who I was observing as they were facilitating and holding sessions with large groups in the room. And actually, I thought those particular approaches they were using, or some very specific approaches they were using, were really effective, more effective than my own. So therefore, I'm trying to make a point of learn from what I'm observing and try and make the bits of their behaviour that were resonating to try and make it part of my behaviour as well. And I think it does go hand in hand with the feedback, because of course sometimes it's not just as easy as observing and then adopting that approach. Sometimes you might need to observe somebody and go and ask for some specific feedback from them, how they might have developed in that way. I think that's probably one point that occurs to me. I think it feels like as well it's a natural thing to probably to move on to our last question, which is, you know, any advice to younger or more inexperienced BAs or those new to the profession as to how they can develop their own BA approach. And I'll start with you on that question, Yasser, please.
Well, my first advice to the junior BAs or those who are starting their career, they should first try to learn the standards. Of course, the best place to learn the standards is the Business Analysis Body of Knowledge guide of the IIBA. But don't purely depend on the standards that are in the book. Don't always depend on the book. Don't work by the book, as we say. So try to adapt and to be flexible with the environment you're working with. Try to learn from your senior or your leaders, okay? Try to be involved in discussions. As we are change enablers, and we are communication gurus, right? So we should be always communicating with every type of stakeholder. At the start of the career, most of the communications will be with our seniors and our leaders or team leaders or our managers. So try to understand from their experience, to try to learn from them, try to reflect on the standards that you have learned, to compare the standards with the actual thing that is done on the ground, okay? Try to mix between them. It's not always the book that should be implemented or applied, okay? Sometimes we need to customize. Sometimes we need to be, or not sometimes, we always need to be flexible, okay? If we understand the book before we start work, we should try to reflect, okay, and compare between them. If we start work before reading the standards or understanding the standards, don't get shocked when you read the standards and understand the standards and find that they are somewhat different from what's actual on the ground. It happens. We customize. We don't always work by the book. So start smoothly, be flexible, try to learn from your seniors, and don't neglect the standards. You should understand the standards as well.
Excellent advice, Yasser. Excellent. Kathy?
I want to echo what Yasser said. It's nice to have that foundation, I guess, of knowing what's in the business analysis body of knowledge. They're great standards. I don't know whether everybody should go out and study it before you start as a BA, though. Definitely we didn't. I'm sure that when we look around us, the word BA didn't even exist, let alone the BABA. For me, the most important part of when you're starting as a BA, and one thing that I think has already been mentioned, is that we expect ourselves, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to have all the answers. And it's absolutely not the case. When I work with my BAs, whether I'm training them, mentoring them, or working in organizations, the first thing we have to understand is the business analysis, as a business analyst, you're asking the questions, not answering them. So get good at things like curiosity, get good at asking a lot of questions, get good at really kind of thinking, is that all there is? And there's this, you can't teach this stuff. There's no way I can teach you how to be curious, except for saying, be open-minded, be thinking about what would they see? How would that stakeholder see it? What's the user doing there? And it's really about kind of digging into that inner child, as if you don't know any answers and you're seeing things for the first time, and lean into that, which is, of course, as a beginner BA, that's going to be exactly the position you're in. So don't feel obliged that you need to know everything. You don't. You need to ask the questions to find out and then facilitate that shared understanding. So look at the standards, talk to your leaders, ask what's expected, look at improvements, ask for feedback, but don't think that you need to know everything, because I know I used to beat myself up as a junior BA thinking, they ask me questions, I don't know what they are, I'm going to look silly, I'm going to look stupid. No, you're going to look amazing by saying, I'm not sure I know that, can we repeat it again? Or imagine I don't know anything, explain it again, and you'll get a long way by actually being a bit open and vulnerable and saying, I don't know.
Yeah, and being comfortable, or learning to be comfortable not knowing the answers, is a great first step to be able to ask the open questions so you can understand the answers, and probably people in the room can learn from those questions as well. So excellent advice as well. Jason.
Well, I'm trying to think how I can build on what's already been said. I think standards are really interesting, and as Yasser was speaking, I thought standards for me are really important to understand them, but they are, I would say, a lens on a problem situation or in a project. You look through, you see what's going on through the standards, and often what's going on does not match what the standard is. But there are elements of what's going on that speak to the standard. So you know, one way of looking at it is, okay, is there a business case? A business case would be a standard. Okay, what is the document in the current situation, or something that's written on a post-it note that represents what the business case should be? And then you might elaborate that a little bit more to make it closer to the standard. So use a standard as a guide, not a prescription. I think the other thing that I think I've learned is, one, you're only human, and everyone else is only human. So the thing about it is a lot of times, especially as a junior BA, you'll be in a workshop or you'll be in a situation where you will feel like you don't know everything, or someone's made you feel like, you know, less than nothing because of, you know, a conversation or something they've really said. And you don't really know where that person is coming from on that particular moment. So I think something you need to bring into those kind of interpersonal relationships is everybody is just doing the best they can with what they have. And your objective is to get the information that you need from them in a collaborative way in order that you can move to the next step. So it's important that you don't get sucked into those kind of conversations that make you feel that you're not going to be productive. You've got to kind of have those conversations, say, yeah, that person might have had a bad day. It's not necessarily about me. What I need to focus on is what do I need to do to take this project forward? And that's not always easy, but over a period of time, as you grow and go through more of those experiences, you realize that everybody has their good days and their bad days. And if you meet someone on a bad day, that's just something that's happened on that particular moment, and you can move on.
And it emphasises the importance of, when we talk about our BA approach, it isn't just what comes out of the book or how we approach techniques and particular activities. It's the softer skills as well. That's as important as developing as it is your like knowledge of the techniques and approaches as well. I think the only point I can add to that really is just really to encourage BAs to just experience working with different stakeholders, being in different projects, on different situations, working on different products, and just experience and being on Agile or hybrid or waterfall projects as well. And the more they can experience in terms of different types of engagement from a BA perspective, then the more they'll probably encounter different ways of working, some good, some bad. And actually they can then have an opportunity to learn from those situations and evolve their own approach and their own soft skills and their own confidence, I guess, in both of those two things. But I'll leave it there in the interest of time. But thank you, everybody. We are out of time, but thank you, Kathy, Jason, Yasser, for your time and your excellent insight, as I would have expected. So thank you very much. We'll look forward to seeing the three of you in the wider BA community sometime soon, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Kathy. Thanks, Yasser.
Oh.
Great to meet you.